Alrighty, so let's bring you in here and I'll show you what we did. So this is our Heim joint that's going to connect to the actual transmission mount. You have a jam nut here that stops this from turning. This is called a bung. And this gets welded on the end of your tube. It's threaded on the inside for the Heim joint to screw into. And then what we did here was I drilled two holes, one on the top and one on the bottom, and we're gonna plug weld through from that bung up to this tube, and then you weld all the way around this seam. And by doing it that way, you ensure that it's not gonna break the end of the tube off and try to pull out, because now it has to break those rosette welds all the way through. So we have this one here. This is actually at the rear end or the axle, and this is the lower bar. So what I want to do is kind of mock it in place and hold it where it's going to sit. And then that'll give us the length we need for the front. We can cut that one and do the exact same thing. Shove that bung down in there. And as you saw, I had to use a hammer and just lightly tap it in. That's no problem at all. They make them kind of really snug to get into that tube just so that it doesn't, you know, walk up or down or whatever. It stays absolutely parallel with the center line of that tube. So that one's in there. Back to the car now, and we'll try to set the upper to this one so we know kind of where these two are gonna sit, and we can cut all of our little braces that go all the way up this thing. So we were able to get that bent, as you can see here. I had a pair of vice grips where I want the bung to start for this bottom tube that's gonna come and connect to our transmission cross member. So I just put a pair of vice grips so that this would always push to the exact same spot. Now I've tacked it. I put a spacer in back here so we're spaced away from the floor. And then coming this way, we have our upper bar that comes up on top of the pumpkin up here, and it's got the double adjuster here. So one side, let me see if I can get you up there. There you go. One side started left hand and one side started right hand. So you can just twist this adjuster nut here in the middle, and you'll be able to change that pinion angle. And then on the bottom, you can see here, I just have a vice grip to this strap, but that's where we put our Heim joint. So we're gonna make a couple brackets that hang down like this, and then we'll make some that go up like that. And then we need one up here that comes off of this tube right here. So we're getting pretty close on that. I do want to cut a whole bunch of bars that are going to go in here, but I do not have the proper hole saw. You use a hole saw to kind of cope these real fast. I did this one over here with a grinder, as you saw earlier, and not only does it take a little while, it doesn't fit just as nice as I'd like it to. So all of those little braces or whatever you want to call them, those will all be hole cut. Now, one more thing I'd like to get done tonight is this is the bracket, or the bearing I should say, for the anti-roll bar, and that stops the car from torquing left to right, or passenger side to driver side. So this bar is just a hollow tube here, as you can see, and what it does is you try and twist that tube so it makes the car or the rear end kind of go up and down together like this. It doesn't let the driver's side or the passenger side go more than the opposite. So this customer had a pretty genius idea. This bearing goes inside the arm. Let me run over here and grab one of the arms. Here we are. Okay, so this arm right here is what goes from that bar. You weld the bar in this big hole all the way down here to this little end. Well, this bearing is the exact thickness of the space between these two arms. So what they want you to do is put that bearing in between. Let's see if I can do it here with one hand. No, please hold. So we're back. All right, so as you can see here, I just slid the bearing down inside those two arms. So that's the way that they want you to mount this thing. And now you're supposed to weld both sides of this arm to that tube. And that's how you get that kind of like torquing effect. Problem is, when you weld both those sides, you're gonna put a lot of heat in this bearing chances are you're gonna melt all the grease out of here. Now, with this thing welded on both sides, you can never get that bearing back out to service it. So the customer says he'd like to make a spacer to go in between this gap here. So that'll hold that apart. We'll weld this on. And then he wants the bearings separately mounted off to the side. So if he ever has to service these or change these out, all he has to do is undo these 2 bolts here at the bottom. I already have one out. And he can take this bearing plate, throw it in the garbage, and put a new bearing on it, because he does plan to street drive this thing quite a bit. So our plan tonight is I went and this is made to mount onto a tube. As you can see, you see that half circle in it. Well, I went and made new ones that are flat at dynamic. So these are going to weld on the rear end. Let me show you. My plan is to mount this up here like that. And I made these the exact thickness of the back brace here, so we can weld one on here, one will go on the other side of the bearing, and then way over there on the other side of the axle tube, we'll do the same thing. So my plan is to get this thing kind of mocked up and tacked in place tonight. Client said he wanted to stop by again tomorrow and just check up on, you know, progress or whatever. Now, mind you, it hasn't been a ton since he was here, but that's the way things go. You get tied up doing other stuff during the day, and sometimes they fall a little bit behind. So I'd like to get this thing mounted up tonight, so at least it, you know, looks like we've tried. And we'll try and make some brackets tomorrow, or, yeah, I guess tomorrow's Friday. So, yeah, we'll make some brackets tomorrow. So, I thought I would take this perfect example to show you why sometimes things don't go as easily or as fast as people want. Now, I just mentioned that we're going to be mounting this anti-roll bar right here. I know it's kind of hard to see here, but it's up on top of this strap. And these 2 brackets that we just bolted on should keep this bar right here about 1/2 inch off of the center of the differential right in here. Now, I can't take them in any further because the tube would hit that differential housing here, this fabricated section. So it has to be that far out. Now, I didn't want to go too close to where it rubbed, because I don't want it rubbing through and causing a leak with oil or anything like that. So that's about as far in as I can go, and I want to keep it in the center of that tube. Now, all of that said, that means that for the bar to sit center, I need the outside, this outside plate to sit on that mark. Now, if you can tell, straight up from that mark is this bracket. So this bar does not fit in the location due to this bracket being in the way right now. Now, when the suspension goes up in the car this way, it's gonna have to be clearance up probably another 1.5 inches. We have about 1 inch of travel in the shock. And again, you don't want it to bottom out every time, you know, it hits. I don't want that little tube to hit on the frame, causing a bind. So this bracket, both sides of it here, we need this front part and this back part, both need to be cut away like this, clearanced out, and then that's gonna have to be braced after the fact, because that holds the panhard bar. And so let's go over what a panhard bar does and why it's kind of important. Now, if you look forward in this car, you have the lower control arm right over here. You have this torque arm right here that we're making, and you have this other lower control arm here. All of those are in a straight line, so there's nothing that stops this axle going left to right or driver side to passenger side in this vehicle. Now, this anti-hop bracket that we're trying to put in, or anti-roll bar, all that does is, again, it's going to sit parallel with the 3 bars we were just talking about, but it's going to stop it from going driver side to passenger side up higher like this. It doesn't stop side to side movement. Now, the only way to do that in this style suspension is to mount a bar that goes from this bottom hole here, or this bottom bolt, all the way over to this side, and it mounts over here. And what that does is that one's only job is to keep it left to right in the vehicle, not forward or backward or anything of that nature, just left to right. And as you go up with the suspension, it kind of flattens out and it'll come back down. So as you move in this arc, it kind of pushes the rear end over to the driver's side or passenger side as it kind of goes up and down, because the more flat that bar is, the further away it's going to be than if it goes like this. So all of these things come into play. Now, the panhard bar we just spoke about needs to mount to this bracket, and that's the only thing in this whole car that's responsible to keep that axle left to right. So you don't really want to, you know, self-tapper it to the side of the fender or anything of that nature. It needs to be a good solid bracket on both ends. So yeah, now we get to clearance this bracket out and then brace it all back in. So here we are, we just got that cut. As you could see, I only cut one side of the bracket, the back side. This front side is out far enough that I don't think we're gonna have to cut it. But now, if you can see that black mark, when I put our bracket right up to it, right like that, we do have some clearance on the end, which we're gonna need because the tube sticks out further. And we have some clearance on top. It's probably not enough yet, but that'll get us able to mount the bar. And then once we get all the panhard bar in and that torque arm bolted up and kind of sitting there perfectly, we'll be able to cycle the suspension up, cut that last remaining bit so that it's just high enough for what we need, and then we'll be able to plate it in and kind of call it a day. So with that all said, we're gonna now take these little brackets that we just did on the anti-roll bar, we're gonna mount it up there in place, and we're gonna tack it in so that at least that's one more thing tacked up. We can start mocking up the other components to make it work. Okay, so I think that's where we're gonna wrap this video. I went through on this cardboard, as you can see, and I just made some scribbles. So that's enough information for me to go through and CAD out the brackets. I have the exact spacing here of where the joint sits off the rear end housing, angles, whatever, so I can draw it all in CAD, send it over to Dynamic, and get those brackets cut. Now, one thing that I did do is up here on the front, I taped the joint because I don't want to cut this tube here until we have the back solidly mounted. So I taped it roughly where I think it's going to be in, and that's kind of how I want it to lay out. I want the top bar here to be bolted on top of this little swing arm, and then this heim joint to go straight in the back. So I did the CAD, if you will, my cardboard, to figure out how that mount is going to be shaped and the sizes and everything I want. Then I went over and we are going to be putting some subframe connectors in this car, like I mentioned in the last video. So those come right up here, up this pinch weld on the side, on the outside of the car. But there's nothing that ties that into the frame rail up here. So what I did was I also went and made some plates, or I designed them in my cardboard here. I'll put them in CAD, and I'm gonna weld some plates on here, probably one way back here toward the back and one way up here toward the front. And what I'm gonna do is tie some tubes in from this over here all the way over to this pinch weld where that subframe connector goes on both sides. So we'll go from here over to there, and same thing on the passenger side. So we have the transmission mount, how we're gonna mount this torque arm here. I have the brackets that I wanna weld on the side of the frame rail that are gonna go out to that subframe connector. And then back here on the back, see if I can get you in here to view it. This guy right here. So you can see the sheet metal here and here is only single thickness. And what I'm gonna do is weld the subframe connector to a plate that goes on the outside, so the bolt for that lower control arm goes through that subframe connector as well as that stock frame rail. And then what I'm going to do on my cardboard here is I made a small plate. Let's see if I can get you in there. There you go. That's going to kind of mimic the shape of this one, and this bolt is going to go through that as well. So it'll be double thickness on the outside, it'll be double thickness on the inside, and hopefully that'll stop this thing from ripping the sheet metal there and the rear end coming out. So we did the upper mount, the lower mount, control arm front mounts. We have the transmission mount here for the torque arm. We have those subframe connectors, and last but not least, in the back of this thing, if you remember up here, this arm. So this arm needs to be bent, if you see here. So this one here goes straight up into that frame rail, but on this side, it goes up into the gas tank. I need to actually move this over about 1.5 inches. So what I'm gonna do is cut this arm on the inside. We'll end up bending this out, and then we'll re-weld the arm together, because as you go around a turn, the outside piece has to go a longer distance. So with those having those little pipes welded through there, it's not gonna wanna bend that easily. So what we'll do is we'll cut it, we'll kind of take a little pie cut out, we'll bend the outside, we'll weld the inside back together. And I also have one more plate on my cardboard here that's gonna go up here on the bottom of this frame rail. And what that's gonna do is give us a nice secure mounting point to weld the brackets for the top of this arm right there. So I have one plate there as well. So I think that's as far as we can go on this thing tonight. I do need to get back on this black Mustang. And now that the engine bay is fully welded up, you guys saw that, I don't know, about a week or so ago, it's getting ready to go for paint for the engine bay. So I need to get back on here, run some wiring and do some little stuff so that it's ready to leave to go to the body shop. So yeah, that's about it. And it is what it is. I'd like to say thank you to MS Supply yet again. They are the ones who supply all of the hardware for all these types of jobs. Again, guys, if you're in the Detroit area, make sure you go down and see them. If you're not in the Detroit area, they are more than willing to drop ship anything you need like that down to your shop, whether it's a bolt bin or bolts or nuts or washers or butt connectors, zip ties, whatever you need, stuff like that. These are the guys to go get it from. Make sure you tell Robert that Jeremy from 710 Garage sent you. That's it. Appreciate you getting this far, and hopefully we'll catch you again at the beginning of the week when we're putting brackets on this thing and getting it ready to start pulling these straps out of here so we can move on to the next part of it, which I haven't even let you know yet, but there's more work to be done. Anywho, have yourself a great weekend, and we'll catch you at the beginning of the week. Do stuff.